that law tech policy types call ECPA has long since become a four-letter word. Its original sin was leaning on an obsolete understanding of email to grant warrant-free access to messages stored online, but its major failing is now irrelevance. Webmail providers demand a warrant anyway. And yet Congress can't fix a law that has decayed from dangerousness to uselessness. This year is still young and many Republicans now profess themselves uneasy over the Federal Bureau of Investigation's reach, but history suggests 2018 will end like the years before it, with ECPA intact. ECPA's error should have been obvious to people versed in bulletin board systems and email protocols 32 years ago. It imposes a 180-day limit on how long messages stay parked on an electronic communications system. Up to that expiration date, the government needs a warrant from a judge based on probable cause to compel a communications provider to turn over your mail. Afterwards, a mere subpoena suffices. The advent of webmail services in which your messages never left the cloud, beginning less than 10 years after ECPA's passage with Hotmail, only made that line look more absurd. Alas, the reform bill Senator Patrick Leahy had introduced in 2011 only got out of committee in 2012. Leahy tried again in 2013 with Senator Mike Lee, and did no better, even though the Justice Department said it could live with a warrant requirement. The only ECPA good news that year came from Google, Goog, GOOGL, Facebook, FB, Microsoft, MSFT, and this site's parent firm NewsPulse. They all revealed they had insisted on a warrant for stored email since 2010 or 2011, citing the 2010 Warshak ruling. And yet none had thought until then that their customers would want to know about this defense of their rights, which speaks volumes about the false innocence of those pre-Edward Snowden times. Since then, other telecom firms as AT&T, Comcast, CMCSA, and NewsPulse's corporate parent Verizon, VZ, have also said they require warrants. Smaller mail services without staff counsel, however, may still oblige a subpoena. Hope sprang anew in 2015, when that year's version of the Email Privacy Act passed the House 419-0 and the Obama White House endorsed ECPA reform. But in the Senate, Leahy and Lee's bill died in committee after Senator John Cornyn, and then Sen. Jeff Sessions, moved to amend it to give law enforcement warrant-free access in terrorism and emergency cases. Two members of Cornyn's staff did not answer a query sent Thursday asking if his views had changed. What would hold back a bill that Democrats and Republicans support and name-brand email providers ignore in practice? Under the Obama administration, the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Trade Commission complained that a warrant requirement would impede their enforcement activities, even though representatives of each also testified that they don't use their existing ECPA authority. The Trump administration has made it clear that it wants to loosen rules on both companies and law enforcement, which may weaken the agency's cause while encouraging the anti-terrorism argument. Meanwhile, its overall vagueness about tech policy has included silence about fixing ECPA. There is no reason to expect they will act to move reform forward, concluded Sharon Bradford Franklin, Director of Surveillance and Cybersecurity Policy at New America's Open Technology Institute. Meanwhile, Congress has a hard time passing anything these days, not just in tech policy. There no longer seems to be space for small, useful reforms like this update to ECPA, said Chris Calabrese, Vice President for Policy at the Center for Democracy and Technology. Because everything is hard to pass, other actors like local law enforcement and the FBI want to make sure that they get their unrelated priorities met in any piece of legislation. Calabrese and Bradford Franklin both now hope for favorable Supreme Court rulings in cases on warrantless access to cell phone location data and mail stored overseas. More from Rob. Email rob@, follow him on Twitter at Rob Guerrero. Follow NewsPulse Finance on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.